All right, so we can go ahead and get started. This is the first presentation that we actually give new hires that includes interns. So the first week you kind of go through and we give you, access to everything, sales, marketing, engineering, and this is sort of the why presentation, right? So why security? That's a question that we typically ask in our interview process. What is it that you're hoping to accomplish with your life? You'd be surprised at some of the answers that you get to that question. So I'm going to try to give you the why in terms of what we do, right? Why we do what we do. So the motivation, there's actually three parts to this presentation. We're going to skip the sort of culture aspect, why Praetorian, and what we're really going to focus on is the why security, right? So when you look at cyber threats, they're kind of bucketized into these categories. Hacktivism is an example. What's an example of hacktivism that comes to mind, or a group? Anonymous? And then what was another one? Lulsec. It's all about the lulls, right? The love boat. So Anonymous, they kind of got their claim to fame, among other things, the Sony breach in 2011. Do you guys remember that? 77 million records stolen. Of that included actually credit card information. And if you look at Sony's stock price, it actually plummeted for weeks on end. I think it dropped about $20 a share once that breach occurred. The funny thing about Anonymous is Sony hired a company called Foundstone. Any of you guys familiar with Foundstone McAfee? Heard of it? So Foundstone was one of the pioneers in security. They got acquired by McAfee. Anyways, Sony was suspicious of this breach. They hired McAfee. McAfee turned around and hired Praetorian, and we were actually the individuals that found the SQL injection that led to this compromise, right? So they knew that something was amiss. Someone was on the system, and they asked us to do a pin test against the PlayStation website to find out what was going on. It turned out there wasn't a SQL injection issue, and we were able to dump customer information. Cybercrime. Cybercrime actually makes more money now than the narcotics industry. If you guys are familiar with Silk Road, he was an Austin guy, right? Do you guys know how much money that site made in 2 years? It was about $2 billion, $1.8 billion, right? It fluctuates. He made money on the transaction, so that wasn't all him. But in terms of actual commerce the site created, is about $1.8 billion. It's pretty ridiculous. Cybercrime now actually dwarfs the narcotics industry, right? So it's a big deal. The next one is espionage, and this is one that we're going to focus on. We're going to pick on China a little bit, but take that at face value. Russia obviously has a very advanced program, as do a lot of the Eastern European countries. And then the last one is war, right? So NSA. I'm sure you guys are abreast of all of the Snowden breaches, right? Have you guys been following the news?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a good one.
So what's an example, though, that you have seen? So that was a leak, right? That was an NSA contractor leaking information, but where have you actually seen an act of cyber war? Can you guys think of one of the famous ones? Stuxnet. Who said that? Yeah, so what was Stuxnet?
It's an attack on the hardware or software used to control the nuclear facilities in the Middle East.
In Iran, right? So centrifuges, right? So they were causing them to spin up out of control where they would actually burn out. This was a joint effort by the CIA, the Israelis, and Idaho National Laboratory. So again, we're going to focus on espionage, and I'll start with a little clip. This is sort of sensationalized, right? It's from the media, but this will kind of set the stage for this.
Every day, a force from the Far East has a singular mission: to steal the secrets of American business. Intellectual property, blueprints for existing and emerging technologies, research and development advances, and merger and acquisition opportunities. All of it sought and much of it taken as part of a state-sponsored effort by the Chinese to gain and maintain economic superiority.
What is the worst case scenario? We continue to bleed our intellectual property to the point where we just cannot compete with other countries, China specifically. Now they can compete directly in, say, cars and consumer products and durable goods and non-durable goods, most of which is stolen from the United States, that research and development. We lose that edge to future prosperity for the United States. It's that serious.
So that's kind of what we'll be talking about. And again, we're not picking on China. The Snowden leaks reveal that obviously NSA in the U.S. unsurprisingly has its own very advanced offensive capabilities, right? There is sort of a difference though between China, Russia, Brazil, and a lot of these other countries in the fact that a lot of what they focus on is company-based. So it's country to company, right, versus country to country type espionage. So what are they looking for? The first one, information and communications technology. Can you guys think of an event? We'll talk about it here in a little bit. But a technology company that was hit?
All of them.
Well, yes. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Are you guys familiar with Operation Aurora? What hit Google? This is a couple of years ago. No? Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's one of the principal focuses, right? Anything that's whether it's software, communications, hardware, high advanced technology, that's one of the things that they're looking to steal. Natural resource information. Are you guys familiar with Night Dragon? So this was an attack on a lot of firms out in Houston. Has anyone ever interned for ExxonMobil, Schlumberger, any of those? Everyone's kind of EEs, right? Some of the EEs go there. So this was a huge attack against everyone, and anyone that was Chevron, Marathon Oil, all of them were all hit in this. And what they were looking for was information on oil bids, right, so that they could have a competitive advantage against what we were bidding on for oil fields in, I think it was Southeast Asia, if I remember correctly. Military technologies, that goes without say. We'll talk about some of those in a second, but it really has to do with unmanned vehicles, drones, right? That's of particular interest. Submarines and aerospace, right? Dual-use technologies. What do I mean by that? What would be an example of dual-use technology?
GPS.
Yeah. And anything else? Usually alternative energy type technology, solar power, wind power, stuff like that, right? And then finally, government policies. In China's case, if we focus on that, in particular, it's on Tibet and Taiwan, right? Those tend to be major portions of their sphere of influence and part of their going concerns as a country. So there was a pamphlet that was released, and I recommend that you guys read this. I can send you some links afterwards if people are really interested. There's a lot of really good books to read on this stuff too. But this came out from the National Counterintelligence Executive, and the important thing about this paper that was published was this was the first time that attribution was actually given. So typically when companies are hit, theft occurs, intellectual property is stolen, the U.S. government is typically reluctant to actually attribute it to a particular country. And in this document, this was the first time that they actually talked about China and that they are one of the most active participants in this kind of offensive capability. Russia will argue that they're actually the most advanced, but when you look at sheer activity, most of this stuff comes from China. And China tends to be a little bit more quiet about it. Russia tends to be a little bit more braggadocious about it. So what is this?
Predator.
No, it's a Reaper.
But it's not. That's a Chinese knockoff. It's called the Sharp Sword, the Lijin, and it was stolen off of the Reaper's designs, right? So it's almost an exact replica. What is this?
Another Chinese knockoff.
I mixed it up a little bit this time. So this is the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. You guys familiar with that?
Yeah.
It's the most expensive and advanced plane in history. $300 billion, right, to research and develop it. The Chinese targeted Pentagon systems, BAE systems, a whole bunch of defense contractors, and they came up with a replica. If you look at it, the plane is actually identical in the fuselage, right, and in the wings. The only difference is the engine. But it is a complete knockoff of the F-35. And so that's the concern, right? If any of you guys have ever done R&D for your internships, what you're going to find is there's a lot of dead ends. Every R&D effort doesn't always have a positive outcome, right? And eventually you get something and there's some cost to it. It's a concern when a country or a company can take a shortcut by stealing intellectual property and just come up with a system of their own. And not only that, but they actually have an understanding of the weaknesses of this system now too, right? So Google, Operation Aurora. Google in 2011 did something that most companies don't do. They got breached and they actually went public. That's pretty uncommon. Most companies, they get notified by the FBI, they get notified by NSA, they get notified by Secret Service, and it's there's a lid that's kept on it, right? But Google does something a little bit different, and they go public with their breach. And under the cover of Google getting breached and going public, some other companies feel comfortable enough and say, yeah, we saw something similar. And Adobe, Juniper, and Rackspace also publicly admit that they were compromised, right? The media does some investigation, and some other companies are added to the list, Yahoo, Symantec, and so on. In total, there's about 34 organizations that the media uncovered that were hit. One of the interesting things was, and you guys probably don't remember this, but HP Gary was also hacked by, I think it was Anonymous or Lulzsec.